Have you seen it all? Shooters galore, RPGs becoming increasingly vapid, open world games that have remarkably little in them? Maybe you're the thinking gamer, wanting to set up a plan and see it into fruition. Well, try Lord of the Rings: The Third Age. This is a turn-based game that's loosely based off the movie trilogy, in which you play as your own fellowship, following in the wake of the main cast through the major events of the films. But Dual-Wielder, I've never played a game like this. How does it work? Well, you shrewd and dashing viewer, I'm glad you asked. You see, this genre doesn't test your reaction time or aim. It tests your ability to analyze the enemies present and assess what both they and your team bring to the table. Along the right side of the screen, you can see the turn order, showing which of your characters and enemies will have a go. This lets you know what to prepare for. So if you're faced with two enemies that both take 2 turns to kill, there's no point in targeting the first one if you don't get 2 turns before it can attack. Instead, attack the second one and kill it before it can take any action at all. Now, certain actions will affect the turn queue. Stronger abilities will generally make both your characters and enemies have to wait longer before their next turn, while weaker actions will typically let that character act more frequently. Status effects like sleep and stun will also stop characters from getting a turn. This affects both you and enemies, so watch out for late game opponents that will try to debilitate you and keep you stun locked. Going full Unga Bunga has its time and place, but you'll need to keep your wits about you. But then there are the various skill types. Most of your characters will have access to either melee or ranged attacks, and then spirit powers. The first two are pretty self-explanatory, but spirit powers are magic skills. Now, melee and ranged skills, generally, with a few exceptions, can potentially miss, meaning that the character deals no damage, doesn't earn any skill points, and doesn't apply any associated effects. Spirit powers can't miss, though. The drawback is that they tend to be more expensive. What does that mean? Well, every action, aside from a basic attack, costs action points, or AP. The stronger the skill, the more AP it will cost. Like I said earlier, though, stronger skills will cause your character to take longer between turns, so don't go all out if you don't need to. But that segues nicely into character stats. As you level up, your character's health and AP will be refilled, meaning that you don't need to use items between fights for them. But what do these stats do? I'm sure you've played a game or two that does a terrible job at describing what different stats do, so let me give you the lowdown. Strength boosts your damage with both melee and ranged weapons. Your powerhouses will want this stat so that they can lay the smackdown on enemies. Characters like Berethor, Morwen, and Hadhod will want to make use of this stat. Dexterity increases your chances of successfully hitting enemies with your weapons and makes it more likely that your characters will dodge attacks if they have the ability unlocked. You can have the highest strength stat in the world, but it won't do you any good if you miss. So any characters that don't rely on spirit powers will want to put some points into this. Constitution increases a character's health and resistances. The higher this stat, the tankier they'll be. Hadhod and Berethor will generally be your hardiest characters, but Morwen will want a few points into this as well to make sure that she doesn't go down too often. Speed determines how often a character gets turns in combat. Some enemies have a very high speed stat, letting them get loads of turns in very quick succession. Give some of your own characters some speed to help offset this. Finally, Spirit increases your total AP score, along with buffing the effects of spirit powers. It even has a small effect on overall health and resistance to spirit powers. Idrial will want this as her primary stat, as will Eaoden or Hadhod if you want them to specialize in spirit powers. But enough of the technical stuff. You want to know the cast, right? Well, let's get into it. Berethor is the first character you'll be able to play as, and he's the generalist of the group. While his damage is high, it won't be the highest. While he's tanky, he's not the tankiest. But what he is is versatile. This lets him slot into several roles fairly well when needed. His armor is usually very high, and he can also equip a shield to add to that. Most of his skills are also pretty cheap in terms of AP, so he'll seldom need to worry about running out of gas. While he's strong in melee, his leadership skills can be just as vital.
I was elected to lead, not to read.
While you won't really need them in the early game, they can be game changers later on, granting immunity to certain status effects as well as increasing your party's defenses and attacks. His main weakness is that he has no ability to attack from range by default, and some encounters restrict your melee abilities.
Oh no!
For this, he'll either need to equip certain elf stones or simply buff other characters with his leadership abilities. Some of his best skills are Orcbane, which deals bonus damage against orcs, Targeted Strike, which ignores an enemy's armor value, and Gondor Rampage, which lets him strike 5 times in a single turn. But his leadership skills are great too, and some of the ones to aim for are Stand Fast, which grants the party immunity to stun, Shield of Courage, which grants an immunity to fear, and War Cry, which gives Berethor and 2 other party members a free attack against an enemy. Some stats to focus on for Berethor are Strength to keep up his damage, Constitution to make sure he can keep tanking hits, and Dexterity to make sure that he can reliably hit his targets. Idrial is the second character to join your band, and while she can be spec'd out to fight with her sword skills, she really shines as a support character. She naturally has several healing and buffing spirit powers, ensuring that you can always recover, even when all seems lost. She's also the most broken character, able to cheese fights in the late game if you figure out which skills to combine. Her defenses are rather low, and while she isn't made of tissue paper, she will go down quickly if enemies focus her, so having hardier members around to take the heat off of her is advised. Her sword skills can do moderate damage and can inflict a wide array of debilitations, but her spirit powers are where she really shines. Some of her best skills are Loudwater Fury, which deals significant damage to an enemy, Cleanse Shadow, which removes all debilitations from a character, and Gift of Galadriel, which restores a great amount of health. As you learn skills though, you can manually select which skill you want to learn next. And with Idrial, you'll want to learn spirit skills like Aura of the Valar and Power of the Valar as soon as possible. Aura of the Valar will cause the character that it's cast on to be automatically revived if they go down, and Power of the Valar can be used to bring back a character if they haven't had it cast on them. This will fully restore their health and AP along with removing debilitations, so sometimes it's more beneficial to let someone die to reset them.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Idrial also demonstrates how useful it is to make sure which characters are active. You'll have 6 by the end of the game, but only 3 can be active at any time. If Idrial is one of the 3 active characters, you'll have to wait for her turn to act. But if she's on the bench, then you can bring her out on anyone's turn. Just make sure to give each character a successful action in each fight. Otherwise, they'll only earn half the XP. Idrial will want the vast majority of her skill points to go into Spirit so that she's got enough juice to cast Spirit powers every turn, as well as pushing their effects to the maximum. Elegost will join the two after a short while, and for a time his damage will be better than both Berethor and Idrial, but soon enough it will come to trail behind your other characters. But damage isn't what you want him for. Nobody can inflict debilitations quite like Elegost can. He has Crippling Shot, which slows an enemy down, Blinding Shot, which reduces an opponent's accuracy, Draining Shot, which heals him for the damage inflicted, Piercing Might, which reduces an enemy's strength, and can bind enemies from using various skill types. But some of his passive skills are what unlocks his true potential. Passive skills are learned as a character levels up, and just like other skills, you can manually select which one to learn next. 2 skills combine with Elegost's Arrows of Sleep to make him a lifesaver in big fights. By default, Arrows of Sleep puts an enemy to sleep for a short duration, where it won't get a turn unless you attack it. But with the passive skills of Sleep Volley and Lingering Sleep, Elegost can put all the enemies in front of him to sleep permanently. Now, stronger enemies are often immune to sleep, but even shutting down their support can swing things drastically in your favor. Elegost can even use a unique ability. Examine lets you see an enemy's resistances, letting you know exactly what type of damage you should use against them. Elegost will want most of his skill points dumped into Dexterity, Spirit, and Speed. Dexterity will ensure that he consistently hits his mark, Spirit will keep him from running out of AP, and Speed will let him get more turns more frequently. Hadhod is the 4th member to join your party, shortly before you leave the first area, and he's meant to be the dedicated tank of your group. Berethor can do this fairly well, but none of your characters will be as hard to kill as Hadhod. His constitution is naturally very high, and his armor values are strong to boot. He and Berethor are the only characters that have the Taunt Foe ability, which will force an enemy to target only them, and it helps you keep your squishier characters alive. But just because Hadhod is built like a brick wall, doesn't mean he can't dish out some punishment as well. He also has a naturally high strength value, letting him wallop enemies for some of the highest damage in a single attack your party can deal. Not only that, but he can equip either an axe or a hammer to take advantage of enemies that are weak to either slashing or blunt damage. But all this comes at a cost. For Hadhod, the price he pays for these bonuses is his speed. His is naturally very low, leading to him getting fewer turns that are farther between than your other characters. His dexterity is also dubious, and many of his skills are fairly expensive. He does have several useful spirit powers in addition to his melee skills, so both skill trees are viable. Keep in mind, though, that enemies in the 2nd and 3rd regions have a high resistance to fire damage, which most of Hadhod's spirit powers revolve around, discouraging you from using them early on. But don't let these setbacks deter you. Hadhod is an incredibly strong addition to your group, and he's seldom a bad choice to have on the front lines. Some of his best axe skills are Crippling Smash, which delays an enemy's next turn, Hew Armor, which reduces an opponent's armor value, Durin Wrath, which strikes twice and stuns an opponent, and Rampage of Durin, where Hadhod strikes 4 times. He's got several powerful spirit skills too, though, and some of his best are Stone Shield, which stops an ally or himself from taking any damage until it's destroyed, Devastating Shield, which puts an aura around the party that damages any enemies that strike them, and Dragon Calling, which deals high fire damage to all enemies. Hadhod will want his stats put into Strength for melee damage, Dexterity to keep him from missing, and some into Spirit as well to keep him from running dry. Morwen is the 5th character you'll acquire, and when you first get her, she won't be that great. Her starting gear is quite frankly terrible, her weapons don't have a high damage value, and her equipped armor is flimsy at best. This means that she'll need attention from Idrial and some tanking from Hadhod to stay alive. But level her up and get better gear for her, and she'll become a warrior who will be dealing the most melee damage of your entire group.
Push it to the limit. Walk along.
She dual-wields axes, and all but one of her skills let her hit at least twice with each attack. While her individual strikes will deal less damage than Berethor or Hadhod, she hits more than once in her attacks, and her speed value is naturally higher than either, letting her get more turns, thus pushing her DPS to the extreme. She'll always be a bit of a glass cannon though, so it's best to have tanks or healers on standby just in case. She's my favorite character to use though, and can make short work of targets that can give even Berethor trouble. Like Berethor though, she doesn't have any natural ability to attack from range, so her use in a few fights will be restricted. Instead, she has thief skills that let her snatch things from enemies. Her steal item skill usually nets you some recovery items from normal enemies, but when used against bosses, they'll grant you special gear that can't be acquired anywhere else. Some of her notable axe skills are Battle Haste, which boosts her speed, Paralyzing Wound, which stops an enemy from using melee attacks for a short while, and Rohirric Rampage, which lets her attack not 4, not 5, but 6 times. A few uses of Battle Haste lets Morwen get an action almost every other turn, and she can learn skills that both poison and wound enemies, which can be combined to deal massive damage over time to a strong enemy, and no opponent is immune to those status effects. Some of her best thief skills are Steal Health, which lets her heal herself, Steal Action, which restores some AP, and Cloak of the Plains, which stops her from being attacked at all for a time. Morwen will want her skill points to be put into Strength to keep her damage high, and Dexterity so that she doesn't miss. This is especially important for her, seeing as she relies on multiple strike attacks. A few points into Constitution will also help her stay alive. The final character to join your entourage is Eaoden. You get him pretty late in the game, but he comes with a ton of stat points for you to distribute however you like. Like Hadhod, he can be specialized in melee or spirit. Both routes are worthy, but seeing as you already have Berethor, Hadhod, and Morwen, who are all strong melee fighters, I almost always put his points into his spirit skills. This lets him be completely independent of any other characters. He can drain both health and action points from targets, meaning that he'll almost never run out of gas, and requires almost no attention from Idrial. More than that, he can also transfer his own health or AP to an ally, keeping them in the game. He's a wild card in terms of what he can do, and so he's got a tool for every job, no matter how you spec him. Some of his notable spirit powers are Silence Evil, which stops an enemy from using spirit powers, Dispel, which removes any buffs from all opponents on the field, and Scatter Health, which drains health from an enemy and distributes it to the party. His Spearcraft skills include Rupture Armor, which ignores the target's armor value, Wrath of Edoras, where Eaoden strikes 3 times, and Rampage of Helm, which lets him strike 5 times. And as a bonus, if you grind all the way to level 99, which is the max level and will take an incredibly long time to reach, Eaoden will learn his final passive skill, which will make him immune to all spirit power damage. If you spec Eaoden to be a caster like I do, then most of his skill points should go into Spirit to give him enough AP to keep casting and maximize their effects. If you want him to be a melee fighter, then he's going to want Strength and Dexterity. And on top of all of this, you'll occasionally fight alongside hero characters, those major players from the story who have stats far greater than yours and will often be needed to take on some of the strongest bosses. And when you clear an area for the first time, you'll unlock Evil Mode, where you can play notable fights from that section, but as the villains for unique rewards. All in all, I'd give this game a 5 in terms of objectivity. The gameplay is solid, but the narrative mostly consists of the cast warping around to the notable locations from the story, regardless of whether or not they could have actually reached these places. Seriously, the game glosses over how your fellowship seems to just warp around to be wherever the plot demands that they need to be. Also, the game literally pulls the same plot twist twice. I am not exaggerating on that one. Subjectively, I would give this a 7. I've sunk so many dozens of hours into this game. When I'm in the mood for a slower experience that revolves around strategy instead of Twitch reactions, this game has never let me down. I had it back on the PS2 back in the day, and I run it on an emulator now. Wow, I just realized how old I am. But if you like this sort of game, or are a fan of The Lord of the Rings, get yourself an emulator and give this game a go. You'll be glad you did. But anyway, what do you think about this game? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a like if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I would like to thank you for watching, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.